Okay, so today we'll be discussing App Store regulation trends. Um this is just some disclaimer. It's entirely informational and not comprehensive. What we'll be going through today is the current working of Apple App Store and Google Play Store, what's happening in India, global developments in the space in terms of regulations, investigations, and we'll end with what India can do in this space. When it comes to the workings, I think the most well-known figure here is the 30% commission that both Apple and Google charge. This is levied on any sale of digital goods and services through both the platforms. And the key distinguishing criteria here is digital goods because that's what exempts platforms like Amazon and Uber. These two apps allow sales of physical goods and services, so they do not have to pay this commission. But other than that, I think pretty much your subscription apps, your gaming apps, all of them have to pay this cut. And recently, last year, in fact, after a lot of pressure from developers, Apple announced that it will reduce this commission to 15% for developers that are earning less than 1 million. And Google this year followed up with the same similar commitment, saying that all developers who their first 1 million will be charged at 15%. So this actually, if you see, it applies to nearly 95% of the developers only pay this 15% commission because they earn less than 1 million. But the revenue making customers for both Apple and Google constitute that remaining 5%. And in addition to commission, there are there's one other fee that developer pays, which is a $25 one-time fee for the ability to host apps on Google Play Store, and a $99 per year fee for Apple developers. More importantly, are policies regarding third-party app stores and side loading. Apple is straightforward here. It does not allow third-party app stores unless you jailbreak or something like that. But with Google, Google's public policy is that they do allow third-party app stores, and they welcome third-party app stores. But then recently we had the Epic lawsuit documents reveal that Google, in fact, tries to pressure OEM smartphone manufacturers to only include the Play Store and not include their own competing store. It tried to even get Samsung to do that, but ultimately Samsung did not agree. So Samsung phones come with their own Samsung store as well. And when it comes to side loading of apps, again, it's simple. Apple says no. But when it comes to Google, Google does allow side loading. You can get the APK file of the app and install it by yourself. But Google does not make that easy. So there is a security warning, and there is also, as Epic Games pointed out, there's like a 15-step process to install using APK compared to just a couple of steps if you download directly from Play Store. So there's friction. Even though Google allows it, there's friction there. The most contentious issue here is how these two platforms deal with third-party billing and payment systems for in-app purchases. Both of them do not allow that. And more importantly, they do not allow developers to even point users towards these, even if they're outside the app. So the exact wording is that apps cannot encourage users to use a purchasing method other than the in-app purchase, and apps cannot use buttons, links to point to this. And in theory, that's fine, but in practice, this is how it looks. So on the left is a uh, Netflix iPhone app screenshot, and right is Spotify's. So these two platforms currently do not allow you to sign up on their app because they do not want to pay that 30% commission. But strangely, you can also see that they do not tell you where you can sign up, what the price is, how you can sign up, because all this goes against App Store policies. When it comes to revenues, we do not know the exact figures, but Google's revenues, Google other revenue constitutes Play Store revenue, which accounted for 21.7 billion last year. And Apple's revenues, we can estimate from the fact that they reveal figures on how much they've paid to developers. So from that, we can deduce that they earned about $64 billion last year. Now, what's the issue with the current policy and workings? I think these two tweets are good in summarizing it. On the left, we have this thing that Match Group, which owns Tinder, Hinge, and other dating apps, they pay 500 million a year to Apple and Google in just App Store fees. And to put that in perspective, that's the company's largest expense, and it accounts for 25% of their revenue. So a large chunk of many apps, their revenue goes towards commissions. And on the right, we have another example of Twitter's ticketed spaces. So it's kind of like Clubhouse, but the person hosting that can charge users to listen in. So the creator, if he charges $5, the creator only earns 2.8 from that. Twitter gets 0.7 and Apple gets 1.5. So the two issues that developers have an issue with are the high commission and the inability to use third-party or external payment systems. So they have to pay that commission. And this is what spurred the Epic Games lawsuit against both Apple and Google. So Epic Games did not like this policy. What they did was, in their Fortnite game, they included an option to pay directly to them instead of through the app stores. And they made it a cheaper option for users. So this is how the user interface looked when they did this. And as you might guess, this is directly against Apple's policies and Google's policies. So they were kicked out from the so Fortnite Games was kicked out from both app stores, and Epic Games was also threatened to get its entire developer license cancelled and suspended. Epic filed a lawsuit against both companies, and although the lawsuits differ a little bit, broadly it accuses both platforms of monopolizing the market for distribution of apps and the market for in-app payments. The hearing for the Apple case concluded in May, and we are still awaiting a verdict. The hearing for the Google case is yet to start. More important stuff that happened during the hearings were a lot of important information got revealed, such as the deal with OEMs, which I mentioned before. And then there's also this information that Google was planning to actually buy Epic when this entire issue was going on. That's the money power that the company has. And Apple's special deals, which it offered to Netflix to get Netflix to offer in-app subscriptions. So all this information was revealed in these hearings. There's more to come when the hearing, I think ultimately when the hearings decision comes, that's when we'll know what's happening. This one quote from Ben Thompson summarizes the issue. It's Apple absolutely right that the App Store created economic opportunity, but it's also taking away from an expanding universe of creators and developers. With that, let's just move into what is happening in India. And we'll start with what happened in September last year and work our way towards September this year, when Apple's antitrust case was filed. The Paytm issue, many of you might be familiar with. What happened was both Paytm and Paytm First Games were removed from Play Store for violating Play Store's real money gaming rules. And
I'll explain a little bit about this. Essentially, real money gaming apps are banned in different parts of the country. And so for Google, it's actually difficult to enforce. And a lot of this is based on conversations that we've had offline. So it's not necessarily validated, just to put a caveat there. But what had happened was that Google had banned real money gaming apps from the Play Store, because in some parts of the country they're banned, in some parts of the country they're not, and it's difficult to enforce. So what some apps were doing what some real money gaming apps were doing was that they had surrogate apps running. So and then they were promoting the real money gaming apps exclusively within that app. Apart from that, so what the thought process, from what I understand behind Google banning this, was that what you can't do directly, you can't do indirectly. So Paytm was also promoting Paytm First Games within the Paytm app. And so Google actually pulled it off. And some of this, what we understand, was because of a complaint that Dream11 made through an industry body that it is affiliated with, FIFS. Again, all from what we hear about background, from a background perspective, because Dream11's own app, an app that they had created with cricket scores and some other information, had been pulled for the same reason. So largely this is competition between apps in the real money gaming space that was created a situation where Paytm itself was pulled. And obviously there was a pushback, but Google still had to show consistency there. Eventually, when Paytm, from what I understand, stopped advertising Paytm First Games within the app, was when Paytm itself was allowed back on the Play Store, and this happened in a couple of days. Next slide, please.
So the Paytm, so if the Paytm issue was standalone, I think, maybe the backlash would have been limited. But what happened was the same month, at the end of the month, Google issued a policy update, more like a clarification actually. So they said that they will enforce the billing system on all apps downloaded from Play Store. It's not a new policy because it was already there, but Google gave some leeway to developers. Some gaming apps had links going to external payment sites. Some gaming apps had external payments incorporated within the app. But now what Google said is we are not going to allow that anymore from this September. This was announced last September, but they gave 1 year for apps to comply. And basically Google.
So the way to look at this one, so the way to look at this one is talk about bad timing, right? You've just had a major issue in India about, taking one of India's largest apps, Paytm, off the Play Store, and then just within a week or two, you roll out a clarification of your policy, essentially enforcing the 30% billing. And what we understand that 30% billing was because because of the Epic Games lawsuit, they had to show consistency in terms of global enforcement of that policy, because it wasn't really being enforced in India. So that's what created a huge issue. Sarvesh, could you just...
Yeah, so this, I think Nikhil can do this one because he spoke to these founders.
So I spoke to lots of founders in this space about why they were, like Vijay Shekhar Sharma, about a month before this policy came out, had just created a startup founders WhatsApp group. And there were quite a few founders, about 150 odd founders in that WhatsApp group. And the moment this policy came out, from what I understand, Murugavel Janakiraman, who was an old foe of Google's, having previously gone to the CCI to challenge Google's advertising, basically said that we need to do something. And that led to Vijay hosting a call where about 56 founders participated. And if you look at it, some of this reasoning is very logical, right? If you're making $100, 30% of that goes into advertising spends. Then when you do billing on top of that, if this 30% commission for a digital services company like Matrimony comes in, then Google takes 30% of that also. So effectively, that's a substantial amount of your income just going to Google. And one of the founders, if you could just move to the next one, actually compared it to payment gateways. And there is a thought process that the roles for the App Store need to be separated, right? So there is a search function. There is a separate, so that's for discovery. And then there is a payment mechanism. So if a payment gateway is only charging between, let's say, 0.5 to about 2% or something of that sort for transactions, this 30% commission is huge. So the point is Google should charge for promotions separately and charge for payments separately. The other issue is around APKs. And again, this is based on conversations that I had with people, that Google had also recently issued a policy banning direct downloads or direct linking of APK files to advertisements. So if you clicked on an ad, in some instances, it would lead to direct downloads of those apps. And some of the real money gaming apps, especially affiliated with cricket, were using this to enable downloads because it means there's one step less. Anyway, those apps are not allowed on the Play Store, so they have to figure out some other mechanism for downloading. So because of this warning system for many users that, this is not a Google certified app, or this is not being downloaded from the App Store or the Play Store, there is that leads to drop-offs in downloads as well. So an environment essentially is being created, number one, and this is, if you zoom out and look at it, to drive downloads to the Play Store. And then when if you're downloading from the Play Store and you have a payments mechanism, there's going to be a mandatory 30% fee. So one founder that I spoke with said that this is like they own the entire ecosystem. Most of our transactions happen entirely on apps. Now that means this is like a government charging 30% on all transactions in your business. There's GST and then there's the payment fee to Google because all of our revenues are coming from apps. So that's one of the key issues that was sort of that was flagged up. And so from the call, people were talking about creating their own app store, going to court. a CCI complaint was already filed. In fact, I was aware of another CCI complaint that was in the works, but these complaints that went in after this issue sort of beat them to it. And I'll get into that issue as well later. And then there's the Atmanirbhar Digital India Foundation, which was formed in Jan 2021. And just from an, the IMAI perspective, at least many of these founders were, people I spoke with said that, NASSCOM and IMAI are in a sense conflicted because they also have Google and Facebook and multinational companies in their mix. And so they're not necessarily presenting the case for or the case of the Indian companies alone. And so there needs to be a separate organization for basically presenting what this group wants. Next. So there was a subsequent meeting between these with the IT ministry. I think it was held on a Saturday from what I remember. And again, the same issues were raised. There were relatively fewer people in this group, but the ministry was kind of hands off and said that, listen, they want companies to invest in India as well. So they're going to play a balanced role. They made no commitments. And this issue was heating up. That's when Google deferred the enforcement of this billing system policy to March 2022. Next. So I'll let Sarvesh take over from here.
Yeah. So what was happening in early October and late September, it translated ultimately into an investigation by CCI into both the Play Store and Google Pay. And so what CCI ordered investigation into was three or four main things. So one was the high commissions, which it found was onerous and burdensome to developers. The second one was the forced use of Google's in-app billing system. And the third one was interesting because there was a preference given to Google Pay, and Google Pay was the only UPI app that was there in the in-app billing system. And Google Pay comes pre-installed with many Android operating systems. So is this giving an advantage to Google that others don't have? And separately, there are two other investigations into Google, which is into Android OS and Android TV. And the latest in India is the CCI antitrust complaint against Apple. This was filed last month, but the news of it surfaced earlier this month. It was filed by this nonprofit called Together We Fight Society. We've done a detailed report of them, but to give you an overview, they are based out of Rajasthan, and this is their biggest case so far. They've fought another case in Rajasthan, and they are looking to take on more big tech companies in the future. And
so
their argument...
Actually, Sarvesh did an interview with them. Sarvesh, one of the things that I was wondering about over here was why Apple? Because Apple is almost a minuscule player in the space. So a CCI complaint, ideally, which looks at first, looks at dominance and then looks into abuse of dominance, will not necessarily hold over here. Yeah, but that also depends on how the market is defined. That if it's an app store market, Google owns it.
Exactly. So the point, I asked them the same thing. I asked them why go after Apple, which has less than 3% market share in India. Will CCI even look into this complaint if it cannot establish Apple's dominance? So what the president of Together We Fight told me was they have filed their complaint, and the market that they have identified is not the market for licensable operating system, smartphone operating system, but non-licensable smartphone operating system. And if you look at it from this perspective, the non-licensable market operating system is it's 95% held by Apple. So Apple has a dominance in that market. So the way they phrase their complaint makes it seem like Apple has the dominance in the market in question. So, and for that reason, CCI might take up this complaint and further its investigation. And some of the concerns that the complaint points towards are the consumers are the ones who bear the higher prices because developers pass on the 30% commission to users. And they also took issue with the restrictions that developers have in how they can communicate with users about pricing and other offers. And more interestingly is that they point out that Apple is both a player and an umpire, meaning Apple not only sets the rules for app stores, but it also has its own competing apps in app stores, and it has its own competing apps which do not have to follow the exact same rules that other developers have to follow.
So
We'll ultimately have to see if
just to add
CCI
to this,
investigates.
just to add to this survey, this was actually one of the problems that was also being faced by the entity that I mentioned, was planning to file a CCI case. I don't know if that's going through now or not, but their argument was very simply that that when it comes to Google Pay in particular, and this is a payments app, they're saying that Google tends to like make its own apps in terms of editors picks it, and the way App Store behavior evolves is that it's like the more popular ones remain more popular because it comes in the list of top apps, it comes in the list of editors picks. So the argument was that Google's also playing player and umpire over there because they are promoting their own apps and they own the playing space as well.
Yeah, this is, I think, a issue which developers have been frequently pointing towards, which is self-preferencing, giving their own apps preference over third-party apps. And it's actually a subject of multiple investigations across the globe. I'll get into more later. Uh, Now, talking about what's happening around the world, the biggest development that we've had recently is the new law in South Korea, which mandates that Apple and Google must allow third-party in-app payment systems. Essentially, this allows the developers to use a much cheaper payment system and not pay the 30% commission to Apple. And probably even if they implement their own payment system, maybe even 0% commission. So that's the biggest change that the new law is proposing. And it's the first time any country has proposed something like this. So it's setting a precedent in this field. And the South Korean law also does not allow unusual delay in approval or inappropriate deletions. I think this was put in place to prevent Apple and Google from, penalizing apps that use third-party payment systems. And the penalty for not complying with this is 3% of the revenue earned by these companies in South Korea, which is significant. So I think they have a good deterrence mechanism put in place. Then another development that happened is this concession that Apple made in response to a 2019 lawsuit in US. It said that now it will allow developers to communicate with users outside of the app. So developers can communicate pricing offers and external payment method information through methods like email, text, and maybe even a phone call, but they cannot still show in-app prompts, and they still cannot use buttons or links within the app. But in the same front, a few days later, Apple again made another concession. So this is in response to settling investigation in Japan. And this time what it said was reader apps can include a link which can take users directly to their company's website for account management purposes. Effectively, that means that that link can directly take you to the subscription page to pay. But Apple doesn't phrase it that way. What are reader apps? Reader apps are apps that provide previously purchased content or content subscription. So the best example that I can give you is again Netflix and Spotify. So these two, you can buy the subscription on their website, but experience the services on the app. So these apps will now be allowed to use a link. And I'm bringing this picture back just to show you how it will change things, because now no longer do Netflix and Spotify have to be cryptic. They can actually, instead of saying adding a OK button, they can actually have a button linking directly to their website. This change is expected to come about in 2022. But critics again say that this doesn't go far enough because it's still only one link. The link still takes you outside the app, which is inconvenient to customers. And third point, the link cannot talk about the pricing of subscriptions or what offers are there. It's very vague on what is allowed to be in this link. The policy clarifications are expected to come in the coming months, but critics are not too happy with how far it's gone. What's the most comprehensive effort in regulating app stores is this bill proposed in the US by a few lawmakers. In addition to whatever the South Korea bill enables, this bill also proposes that developers can charge whatever they want in whichever app stores they want. They don't have to have the same price parity. They can charge cheaper if they want in the third-party app stores. Developers can freely communicate with users. Developers can tell them that you can come to our website and we'll give it to you for $2 cheaper than if you pay through the app. And other provisions include preventing what we've discussed earlier, self-preferencing in app stores, preventing Google and Apple from using non-public data to build competing apps. So all this and more is covered in this proposed bill. Will this be presented and will this be passed? That we can only tell with time. But it's the most comprehensive legislation that's being out there right now. Other developments across the world include an investigation by EU, which was initiated because of a complaint by Spotify. Again, it focused on the same issues of in-app billing systems and communication restrictions. This investigation is ongoing. So is the UK investigation, which is kind of broader. It's not only into the app stores, but also operating systems and web browsers of both Google and Apple. This was initiated in June, and we expect a conclusion to this in June 2022. It, among other things, in addition to what we've discussed earlier, it also studies if there are suitable alternatives to default app stores and how much power do Google and Apple have in the distribution. And Russia is also working on its own regulations. It's recently on August 30th, it issued a warning saying App Store must fix its dominance issues and by September end. And this was initiated because of a complaint by customers and developers that customers are not allowed to be informed about cheaper options. So if Russia wants this to be fixed, it basically means that Apple has to allow this communication. So we'll have to see what happens here. And coming to what India can do, the biggest momentum right now is the South Korean law. We have many advocates saying that India needs to have something similar to the South Korean law, which allows third-party payment systems. Paytm's Vijay Shekhar Sharma has advocated for that. So as the ADIF, the organization set up by the startup founders. They are in fact planning to approach the government. And the government also has its own app store. We do not know how much of a viable alternative this is because one, they cannot be on Apple's iOS, and two, even if they do, will they be able to compete with platforms like Play Store or even Samsung Store? So that's another thing. Together We Fight, which filed the complaint against Apple, said that any kind of regulation in this should be left to CCI. One thing that I think is useful for us is to model a bill after the US regulations. So I went over what the US regulations require or what they mandate. India can use that bill as a model to make its own regulations. One thing that they should keep in mind is the US bill is not very comprehensive in addressing security and privacy concerns. So we need to have discussions on that. And that brings me to the two questions that I'm going to have to leave all your listeners with. It's what are the privacy and security risks of allowing alternative app stores and in-app purchasing systems? Apple and Google have frequently argued that they give a safe platform for consumers to transact, and that safety is what has propelled the world of apps to where we are today. So are we jeopardizing the safety and security that consumers feel? And the second thing is, how does it affect consumer convenience? Right now, your card information needs to basically be on Google's billing system and Apple's billing system. But once we start allowing third-party in-app payment systems, does it mean you have to enter your debit card or credit card details for every single transaction rather than, right now it's a Face ID scan or a fingerprint scan? So how does it affect consumer convenience? So
yeah,
that, I think we can.
I think we're at this point largely because of, we'd interviewed Tim Berners-Lee on the 30th anniversary of the web. And one of the questions I'd asked him, and that interview is up on Medianama, if you want to read it, was about whether the web has failed as opposed to apps. Now, he likened the apps ecosystem to the web, but I don't think that's quite accurate because effectively, even with deep linking from the web to the app ecosystem or from the apps to the web, you still have a high degree of control over what users can and cannot access going through the app stores, whereas the web was built to be an interoperable kind of a platform or a network, essentially an interoperable protocol. So what does the future look like? Because you have such dominance in the store space, you're going to see regulation coming through the stores. Currently, the stores themselves are regulating us. And subsequently, I think what you're going to see is that governments are probably going to regulate stores, regulate app through stores. I'm not sure how this is going to play out, but you will probably be seeing a lot more action. Any thoughts on what we've shared? Any questions, any comments, anything that we may have missed? Anyone?
Nikhil, hi, this is Rahul Rai here.
Rahul, just before we stop, I'm going to just ask Harneet to stop the